Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap. Now they control your life.
What's going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 Podcast, where we talk about the lovely city of Fort Worth, Texas. We get into politics, business, culture, news. If it impacts you as a Fort Worthian, we discuss it. We had an eventful last recording week, and I'm with my co-hosts this holiday season. And Zeta, how goes it?
Goes pretty well. I'm just getting ready to go out of town, overcoming a little bit of a cold.
Yes.
And getting ready to travel and hang out with family.
Yeah, we are going to do this. We're talking on Saturday for those of you who may be new, because last week we had some of our most highest viewership in 7 days because we had two pretty important episodes around Mercy Culture getting their exploitation center and us having a discussion about that. We're going to continue to talk about the updates on that as some stories have come out, but then as well as news about Councilman Nettles, and then we're going to have a big story about the overall Fort Worth connectedness and who controls community development and in Fort Worth. And so a lot of topics. We're going to hit transportation. We're going to hit development. There's a lot of news here as we end the year. We also talked about doing some predictions, and we didn't really talk about that in our prep.
Yeah, I think maybe some of our conversation will lead to some predictions, and maybe it will lead to some pivots in the way that we do things.
Yeah.
If people are listening and maybe take some of our suggestions, that's kind of hopeful, wishful thinking.
Yeah, and also we're having the 817 gather this week, and as well, which is we're also talking with some people about what should the future of the 817 podcast topics look like and moving forward. So we're also going to get some in-person feedback as well for us. Yeah,
I went back through all of our topics for this last year, and I actually was kind of impressed with us when I saw the variety of things that we talked about. I thought that's, it's a good thing to look back on what you've done and prepare for the new year. Jim is really, really good at that. Like, he sits down every year and does his whole goals and all that stuff.
Look at him.
I know. I should be a little bit more like Jim.
Well, hey, we're going to dive into our first short story, and that is just an update on Mercy Culture. So as we know, Mercy Culture has got their new center, the Justice Reform Ministry that combats human trafficking. The shelter will be built on the north side of Church Campus at the 1701 Oakhurst Scenic Drive. Fort Worth Council approved plans for development by a 6-4 margin at its December 10th meeting. Now, we had an emergency pod that really has become probably one of our most successful pods out of the entirety of our existence of a pod. And on top of that, I think it was a lot because everyone is really gravitating and relating to the frustration. We had a lot of shares. We had a lot of people talking about it. And I think it's because people are in line with the situation here. And so Harrison Mantis at the Star-Telegram has been really the reporter from their angle, really tracking and talking about this. And so there were some updates in here that I find interesting for us to talk about. Is there anything you would like to address or what you learned differently from reading the story?
I just want to say, first of all, that I think Harrison did an excellent job. I think that this article in the Star-Telegram entitled "How Mercy Culture Beat Fort Worth's Bureaucracy and Politics to Get Its Shelter Built" is a really excellent, comprehensive explanation of how this all came about. Because I was actually pretty surprised at the number of people that I spoke to in the last couple of weeks when they heard that there was something controversial that had been discussed at the council meeting and were like, oh, I think I've heard a little bit about that place and maybe what they're doing, but the number of people that I consider to be people who pay attention who just didn't have much insight at all as to what was being proposed and kind of what's been going on. So I think Harrison did an excellent job basically looking back over the last 2 years and showing that this process, how it came about. And even I learned something from this article,
Even I, as if I
it's
can't
not like
learn from
I
others.
can learn a lot. I can learn a lot, but I'm just saying from the perspective of understanding kind of how things work their way through a development process in the city of Fort Worth, I have a little more experience than the average Joe. So I had said a couple of times on previous podcasts about how if a commercial PUD or a commercial planned unit, planned development had requested to tweak or add to its development plan a 45,000 square foot building, that would be something I would be really surprised to see. And so the conversation discussing how the initial request was considered a change in use and therefore a zoning change would be required, to basically saying it was just a tweak to a site plan which allows any religious activity that the church deems as one of their religious activities. And the tweak in what it was called, going from, it sounded like a residential facility for folks that have experienced trafficking, to
the church applied for a site plan amendment on August 5th, this time listing the project as a center meant to, quote, disciple women to spiritual healing, according to the new permit application.
Yeah, so I think that zoning staff originally kind of looked at it as residences, and that this was a significant change in use of that site plan, and thought that it required a zoning change. But after some meetings and stuff, they tweaked the title of it, and I think made it fit into a category that could be considered a change to the site plan, which still required going to a zoning commission and the council, because adding that significant of a building to a site plan is more than a 10% change. And if you're making more than a 10% change, you have to do a site plan revision.
One of the biggest things we have to know is that the city zoning director said in an email they needed to apply for a rezoning before it could be built. Then that they had a conversation with Mayor Matty Parker, October 4th, the main preacher guy. And so at the end of the day, then on November 13th, so it got accelerated on that zoning meeting, and it was that change that said, oh, we're just making a revision. And so there's just a lot of, to me, like, I think this is the part, like, that's one kind of a shady experience there. And then when you look at kind of moving forward, they're clearly have it in writing what the goal is. So when people get worked up about what I said last week, and yeah, we had some, hateful comments or concerning comments, or EJ, you're becoming too much of a, an extremist or whatever. That literally what it said is, I personally believe, and I believe the majority of Fort Worthians would believe, that women who have been sex trafficked should not be able to be exploited for other people's agenda.
Well, and when they were asked what kind of therapy would be provided to the victims and what licensing would be required for the staff, they didn't provide clear answers to that question. And I think that's a very concerning thing, as you have pointed out.
And I think that, and so it's like, that's the quote is in there in their zoning. It's to disciple women. Disciple is an action. I want to disciple women to spiritual healing. So now the goal is to do that. And so then when you get to their justice reform website and their efforts and how they're trying to hire these advocates to be a part of their teams to support these individuals, I mean, the agenda is not hidden there. You talked about their curriculum. Our team created a complete biblically based and presence-driven residence curriculum for the restoration of body, soul, and spirit of each survivor before they are launched into the realm they feel called to. So, biblically based curriculum is all we got from what is this? It's not science-based. It's not, there's no credentialing, there's no photos of people who actually went to school to manage and understand these needs of people in this hardest times. Then after the residence curriculum, it says prayer nights. The purpose of these monthly gatherings are to unify the body of Christ, local organizations, and community through prayer. We highlight different organizations, city leaders, and those forerunning in justice realm. We believe the greatest platform for our voices to be heard is prayer nights. So these are things that they're asking the advocates to do, and they're saying that each one of these victims would have a advocate, and they're calling it a survivor advocate. And so I don't know, like, those are just like, it's, to me, the problem with all of this is that simple basic thing is that I don't think people in their worstest of worst should be preyed upon. And that's, at the end of the day, the biggest problem that we will always fight for. And I think we should stand up as a city to keep our council professionals, people accountable for their actions, because that, to me, is inappropriate. And you see that Councilwoman Martinez said, I feel like politics got in the way. That led to, there was a time where she thought she had the votes, and now clearly the bullying of this mega church has created fear. And I think that that's at the end of the day, what I feel like happened in that time between October 4th, November 13th, and then up to the vote on December 10th.
Yeah. And I think going back to your comments about how Councilmember Martinez handled herself, I think this article also shows open communication, getting full information, circling back to staff to ask questions. All of that occurred. And this was all gotten from open records requests. And so I think that really reflects that she stayed on top of this. She represented her community. She heard from the applicant. She heard from concerns from residents. And she went into this with an open mind, even ahead of the public meeting, but bringing all of those concerns to the fore. And I think that is fully shown in this article as well.
And we need political officials and leaders today to challenge systems. It's we were talking about that as we're prepping. Everyone's at this point of saying, there's no writing on what makes a community, a church activity, or, this is how we've always done it with some type of system. But this is the point of why you're in leadership. Your point in leadership isn't just to, keep the status quo. It's to say, hey, as a group, we feel like there's holes in this system and we need to improve this. And so we're going to ask the state to be more clarifying on what is a church related activity and have more gusto of being able to step up when something feels uncertain, instead of saying, I'm afraid legality and we can be sued. It's just, you're making the excuse of fear. And when really you just don't have any bold leadership, because in our heart and hearts, that's wrong.
It's based on federal law, not state law, because they were talking about a 1999 federal law, which is meant to protect religious institutions from discrimination.
Even more perfect then that's even great. Like, let's get this to the highest of levels, and
like
make
we
it their
brought
problem.
up before, the whole thing about our attorney general going after a church that is doing what they deem they've been called to do, and that is serve home for people experiencing homelessness down in Austin. And that church is the state is trying to stop them. So they must interpret this 1999 federal case differently than we did here locally.
We live in a city that endorses churches preying on sex trafficked victims at the end of the day. And when one of our council members stepped up, we had a lot of drama around Chris Nettles' back-end story, as he was recorded in a conversation 2 years ago, and this conversation was leaked. It was a 6-minute video by Fort Worth activist Peyton Jackson, debatable on the word activist. At the end of the day, what happened is there was talks about just council people being racist, and basically, quote, all Republicans, including Donald Trump, Mayor Parker, and Councilmember Michael Crane and Carlos Flores, are racist. In a statement December 16th, Nettles says that he made the comments during a private conversation and that he wasn't aware he was being recorded. He added that he made the comments during a deeply emotional time. This was written in a conservative local Dallas paper first called the Dallas Express. And I just want you guys to see that this is the power that is here when you talk about the Fort Worth Way establishment, and when they are either afraid by Mercy Culture and the powers whoever run that kind of conglomerate, but then when someone actually stands up for the people or to have an outside opinion, they then try to attack their personal life, their situation. And how ironic that a full story comes out about Chris Nettles the minute he steps up against Mercy Culture and steps up to our leadership in Fort Worth. I think, to me, regardless of what we think about should someone be able to say someone's racist or not, or, what's ever going on in their personal lives, how crazy is that? This is how power works, is that they were able to get this out right after the December 10th city council meeting.
Reading through the article and kind of having knowledge of some of these players, over the years from following their social media. It's interesting because in Texas, you can record a conversation if one person knows that they're being recorded. So there was nothing illegal about this. But as someone who's been in elected office, to think about the fact that you need to kind of think about the fact that you might be being recorded when you don't know that you're being recorded, I constantly see people on Facebook Live with their phone kind of off to the side in a way that it makes it pretty clear the person that they're talking to and asking questions of might not be aware that they are on Facebook Live. And I think people should say what they mean and mean what they say. And when someone gets caught up and is feeling emotional about something, because, I was emotional about this topic as well, because the topic that he was talking about was whether or not to have police oversight, to have a police oversight commission, in addition to the police oversight monitor. And when I left office, we were moving in the direction of having a police oversight commission. And there were several council members who supported that. And even the incoming chief had expressed support for doing that. And then he changed his mind. So this was a very emotional time. And I could see how Chris Nettles got caught up in that and was talking to someone who had helped on his campaign previously. So this was someone that had been on his team and in his corner, that he would express himself freely in that situation. And then to have that person take that and, put it out there publicly 2 years later seems like messiness. And to your point about the timing of it, did it have anything to do with his challenging the process of hiring a city manager? Did it have something to do with his stance on mercy culture? I think we're about to enter what a lot of people refer to as silly season, which is election season. All of the council and the mayor are up in May. And the filing period for people who want to run for council and for the mayor is from January 14th to February 14th. And having these kind of things come out to kind of embarrass and question and challenge incumbents, I think has something to do with the timing that we're about to enter. And I think that there's going to be a lot of people filing to run against some of the incumbents. And I don't necessarily think that all of them are doing so.
It's hard to be the person who stands up for change and really trying to give another perspective. I don't think going through a more community-based process was a big deal for Jay Chapa. I don't think saying, hey, maybe mercy culture shouldn't be responsible of managing people who are dealing with the lowest of lows and the biggest of challenges. There has to be responsibility there. And I think at the end of the day, our big story is going to be around this. Who controls community? Who controls Fort Worth connectedness? And why is it churches? Why is it these large, corporations? And what are the consequences or the things that we're seeing? So this is in its full short story number 1, which is just an update on mercy culture and the shenanigans around the impacts of that city council meeting. Now we're going to move into a more delighted conversation for Mrs. Anzeta, and it is a conversation that actually has a lot of updates around, and that is our transportation. So there's 3 kind of stories I would like you to walk us through. We can break them one-on-one, or we can kind of go through feedback and thoughts on it afterwards. And this also plays into the big story as well.
So, I'm always delighted when more people are talking about transportation and especially alternative forms of transportation. And while I've gained a reputation of being a transportation expert, I still defer to the folks that are actually experts. I think most of mine is just through experience.
I feel like mercy culture could learn about that, like use that language as well. Defer to the experts, even when you think you aren't.
I think that is that's a true point. I agree with that statement. So the first article that we have on our list is a Fort Worth Report article entitled "Demand for Fort Worth Area Rideshare Program Booms." And I will just start off right off the bat saying that I have some mixed feelings about Trinity Metro increasing this rideshare option because, I have been very critical of Arlington and its insistence that they can cover mass transit and the needs for transportation in their community by using these rideshare vehicles. I think that they have their place. I think that they are excellent last mile options for places that are challenging to serve with fixed route buses and rail. But the delight that I see people having of being able to have what they refer to as a cheap Uber makes me a little bit nuts, because you can get one of these on-demand vehicles for $2. And if you tried to do an Uber across the same space, it would probably cost you at a minimum $15. And I will tell you that it costs Trinity Metro more than $2 for you to take that ride. And so for all the people who get their panties in a wad about subsidizing transit, you seem perfectly fine with having the Transportation Authority subsidize your ride in this kind of glorified, cheaper Uber option. So I absolutely applaud them using them in areas where they can help people get to, healthy food options, doctor's appointments, employment. So like if you take a bus up 35 in the express lanes and you arrive in Alliance, which is built in a way that individual industrial developments are so big that there's no way to walk from an adjacent arterial to the job in the warehouse across massive acres, getting around by rideshare in that kind of a thing, I think is excellent. Servicing the hospital district, I think is excellent, but we're adding Mansfield to the mix, and hopefully they're paying their fair share for this, because I would not like to see the funds that go towards fixed rail and fixed bus routes of true mass transit diluted by trying to serve this areas that don't choose to participate in funding for true mass transit, but ask for this type of service in their community. And, to the point of getting people around that have mobility issues, the need for this 1-year pilot program in Mansfield is specifically called out as saying that it grew as the city has seen a 244% increase in residents 65 and older, as well as 58% increase in disabled residents. So literally folks that are going to reach a point where they cannot get around in a single occupancy vehicle are living and moving to areas because of the way that we've sprawled, where they are not going to be able to get around in cars. And so then having to try to fix that with this kind of on-demand becomes the thing. And I'm not saying we shouldn't consider and pursue and study these options, but I just don't know if it's the long-term solution.
Yeah, and that creates costs, like you said, that we have to manage because it costs more than $2.
The next one is a Fort Worth Report article. Fort Worth passenger rail booms reflects Amtrak's growth. And so this article is basically talking about that the rail ridership in Fort Worth has increased more than 14% in 2024 as Amtrak has set historic records for its national service. 2 Amtrak trains, the Texas Eagle and the Heartland Flyer, come into Cowtown every day, and they connect the city to rail stations throughout Texas as well as Oklahoma City. And so those numbers are growing, and the ridership of Amtrak is setting records. And so I think that this shows kind of the need to connect. And I'm finding this amusing because the airport has been putting out lots of communication after the Sunday after Thanksgiving was such a cluster up there with everybody trying to get there in their cars. And they didn't encourage people right away to use the rail options to get to the airport, but now they've started to. But still, they are telling people that they need to get to the airport 2 hours before their flight. 2 to 3 hours. And I saw it was even on domestic flights. Now, the most recent communication I saw was still saying 2 hours for domestic flights, 3 for international flights. But still, it's 2 to 3 hours. And that's insane. People complain that rail is not fast enough. But if you add the time that you need to get to the airport ahead of your flight to the flight, it might be rivaling the slow trains. And I'm not advocating for just the slow trains. I'm advocating for the fast trains. So I think that this is an interesting subject.
Yeah. And I think you're going to just see the more craving of it. I mean, you're seeing this across national increase, not just in Fort Worth, it's across the country for Amtrak. And I was just in Philadelphia for 4 days with family, and we had a spot right down Fort Worth downtown, and it was beautiful. It was awesome. We got to walk to grocery stores. If we needed to pick up something, breakfast, anything we needed was all around us, and we didn't need to get in a car pretty much all week. And even one of my relatives took a day trip to New York, jumped on the train and went to New York City, and came back literally the same day. And I'm just like, wow, this carless life is so cool to see. And unfortunately, it's so rare in America, and clearly rare
But
in
they also
Texas.
refer in here to, trips on trains that take less time than driving on public roads. And I think that you'll find that more and more as more and more roads get congested.
The final one on the transportation short story is around the new bike share program partnered with Lyft.
Yeah, so Trinity Metro is teaming up with Lyft for a $2.3 million revamping of Fort Worth's bike share program. And coincidentally, I happen to be wearing the old bike share t-shirt today. But Trinity Metro has taken over what was a nonprofit separate bike share program. And all of these new bikes, 90% of them are going to be electric. The fleet of 400 red and white bikes, including 340 electric models, the smart stations powered by electricity or solar power, are all going to be kicking off in January. And the initial launch will include 20 stations in early January, but ultimately the plan is for all 62 new stations to be operational by mid-April. So this relaunch of these stations will happen at some of the previous locations where the Fort Worth Bike Sharing Program was located, but future stations will also be strategically added according to need over time. So it's interesting to see Lyft Urban Solutions going in this direction because, Lyft is like Uber, rideshare, but I think they're also seeing that there are other opportunities to do different modes of transportation.
Well, I also saw that Lyft, Waymo actually surpass Lyft in the amount of drives in San Francisco. So the Waymo is the driverless autonomous vehicle. So it's cool to see Lyft, which I also believe in some capacity is owned or has ownership by Google. And so it's nice to see Lyft pivoting to maybe more city-based, infrastructure-based plays when they might have lost the rideshare world. I have seen a lot of people still do Lyfts because it's cheaper. But I see that, clearly more people consider Uber. But cool to see them pivot and other opportunities for transportation. We have a lot more other transportation things to share with you guys in the big stories. We talk about flying taxis and other crazy drones and all this other stuff happening around the country and coming to our city. But let's go ahead and move into some also big development stories. We had big development stories starting with Alliance, and then we're going to move to a Panther Island development story. Plus, we have JPS. So Alliance development will add 4,000 homes and a new Northwest ISD schools. And so, as you can see here, it says that Farmers Branch based Centurion American Development Group said it's planning to build about 4,000 homes in the Denton County portion of Fort Worth near Perot Field, Fort Worth Alliance Airport. Construction on the first phase of the 1,825-acre Alpha Ranch near State Highway 114 and the future Eagle Parkway will begin in early 2025. The developer said the project, which will start with about 1,300 homes, will straddle newly constructed portions of Sendera Ranch Boulevard. So when you continue to look at this, builders contracted for phase one include Ashton Woods, Beezer Homes, D.R. Horton, First Texas Homes, Mattamy Homes, M&I Homes, and Polt. The first homes are available for move-in, are expected to be ready for the second half of 2026.
So there's two aspects to this article that kind of jumped out at me. And the first one is if you look at the map that's included with the article, it shows a whole lot of gas pad drilling sites, which this development
And that's
is
all the red,
being
correct?
built around. Yeah, so all of the little pad sites with little kind of scraped land areas with the little red circle dash around them, those are all drill sites. And then the red lines on this map, I think is my understanding is that they are pipelines. Actually, they're labeled on the map. So yes, they are pipelines. And so this kind of took me back, and I saw a couple people sharing this article on social media and bringing up the concern of what it means to have gas pipelines underneath your homes. My understanding from what I read, and I have not gone to research this completely, but some folks that I know were very concerned about gas drilling back when it very first started, the whole exploration of the Burnett Shale and fracking in our neck of the woods. Some folks that were very involved in that and very concerned about that, and kind of led the charge to trying to make sure that the setbacks to these things were greater, and that, some folks were trying to have it not happen in the urban areas at all. Brought up the point that having these pipelines underneath homes is concerning because these are not pipelines owned by a utility that is regulated in some form or fashion, but that they're owned by the LLCs that are doing this gas drilling and fracking. And so what happens if those pipelines, deteriorate or something happens to them? When you land at DFW, you can look down and see all of these pad sites, and the fact that we're trying to now squeeze development in and around them is concerning to me. I originally recognized, as someone serving on the zoning commission at the time, that a lot of these pad sites were being created, had concerns about them being located on commercial intersections, because some of those intersections were identified as neighborhood commercial, which is kind of lower intensity commercial. But then once a pad site would be erected on one of the corners, the other three corners, ownership would come in and request a more high intent zoning because they were in such close proximity to a gas well. And so it seemed like a more industrial area. So that really had an impact on development patterns in Fort Worth. And now, with this demand for housing, we're still continuing to put residential around these pad sites. And the environmental aspects of it concern me. The quality of life aspects of it concern me. This is not necessarily a place that I would choose to live. Being honest, it wouldn't be a place I would choose to live because it's far flung and not mixed use, and all of that. So, and walkable. But those are all things that came up to me. And then the second thing was that they have a whole portion of this article that talks about the state law that allows property owners to remove themselves from the ETJ and therefore the ability to be annexed into the city. So these new homes will be a part of the Alpha Ranch Water Control and Improvement District of Denton and Wise counties, one of a handful of municipal utility districts, or MUDs as they are called, that now exist in Fort Worth's extraterritorial jurisdiction. The increase in these special districts reflects a rising trend in response to a state law that allows landowners to petition to be released from city oversight. So, on the one hand, that means that the city will not be required to provide water and sewer to these homes. But it also means that they are not providing police, fire, all of those things. And you can guarantee that once this place gets populated with residents, that they're going to start being like, well, where's our community center? And where's our library? And where's our this? And where's our that? And then they're going to be unhappy because they don't have all those things. So this is a development pattern that concerns me, is basically what I'm saying.
But what is, like, do you think that most people, 4,000 homes to give you perspective here. Last year in 2023, Dallas-Fort Worth metro area had activity with over 50,000 new homes being built over the year, and that's across the entire metroplex. So when you look at 4,000 homes, you're looking at 8% of all homes built in the metroplex off of this one project. And so we can also probably say, when you look at living in Fort Worth, this one housing complex, it's probably going to be more homes built than the entire internal loop of Fort Worth building or creating any type of availability of homes. And so what kind of pressure or does this put on people? I unfortunately am not around a lot of people who are buying new homes or even exploring new homes out in that way. I have a lot of friends who are growing their families and they're looking for bigger homes, but they're looking for homes in the areas that they live in already. So to me, this world of Fort Worth is just a different universe that I don't comprehend to, and our politics and the way we vote would also show that. And so what is your
Well, I
Do
mean,
you
they're
feel
in
people-
the ETJ, not the city, so I guess they can't vote for the elected officials. But when other development comes up adjacent to them, they're going to be showing up at council meetings to say no to stuff. But then the council can look at them and say, you don't even live in our city limits, so
Yeah.
you can't vote for me. So you can't threaten to not vote for me.
Oh, that's a good point. And so would you? So are you feeling like people are seeing this and like they're like, yes, these are beautiful. This is where I wanted to live. Or do you feel like people are stuck because they're like, wow, this is reasonably priced, and the houses are new, and so they're like, I'm gonna do that, and then the consequences they don't see later, and that's just it feels like, it almost feels a little scammy in a way of other entities that we have that make things look convenient, but then there's consequences.
Yeah, I think that most people don't see the full picture like you just described. You can get wooed by a lower price, by a new shiny home, and all that, but a lot of people don't look at it. And so that whole drive till you qualify, which I have also said before, is definitely a thing. And the solution, I don't know what the solution is, because if these urban core neighborhoods are more desirable, but you have folks fighting adding housing there, and people not wanting density, and people being concerned about traffic and all the other things that having more people in a concentrated area brings, then what you get is people building these homes out in the far-flung areas where there's not as much barriers to them doing that. It's easier to develop on green space in the far-flung area than it is to do infill incremental development in the core of the city.
Yeah, and so there's in the big story, I think when we get there, we're going to talk more about this. But I find it fascinating that the state of Texas has allowed people to remove themselves from big cities. Let's be clear, it's the big cities, the blue triangle, that threatens our current state's power. So let's just be, like, to me, I find that fascinating that they're trying to do these things. But I also agree with you. I'm pro, if you want to get the heck out of here. Our cities are also already sprawling. Like, you can leave. Other parts, though, which you look at Alliance, Alliance did over $700 million in local taxes across their 30 years working, with the city. So there's a lot of different value, and that's the power. And the challenge here is that a lot of our economic dollars are up there, but I don't know what kind of actual life and empowerment for a community is up there.
And I think we get into these arguments too about what is it that people want, because there's a lot of folks that say not everybody wants to live in these dense core areas where they're living on top of other people and sharing walls and all that. Some people want a single family home, even if it's a teeny tiny little one with almost no separation between it and its neighbors, because the lots are very, very small. And there's no trees because, all that's required is to put a very small caliper tree in the front yard of each home, and it's going to take 30 years for that tree to provide any shade. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't allow all types of development. I think that, various types of development should be available so that people can find what they want. But I think that people should be informed about what the trade-offs are when you choose to buy a home in an area that doesn't have the amenities of a city.
And another one of these developments, but I guess this one we could qualify as in the loop because it's Panther Island. What we're seeing is that during a December 17th meeting, the Water District Board of Directors approved a $1 million contract to hire a real estate advisory firm, U3 Advisors, to create a strategy for selling the Water District's land on Panther Island. The Water District owns about 116 acres of land near the island, or about 60% of the 193 total developable acres, according to a March consultant report. So that means we're now in the position where we're releasing that land, and who we give that land to is going to play a crucial part of the design of this space. The development side of the project kicks off as the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers continues its work to design and construct a 1.5-mile bypass channel to reroute the Trinity River and provide flood protection to 2,400 acres in downtown Fort Worth. The channel, known as the Central City Project, will create the appearance of natural island on hundreds of acres of former industrial land between downtown and the predominantly Hispanic Northside neighborhood. While the Water District is the local sponsor of the flood control project, the city of Fort Worth is taking the lead on the economic development portion of Panther Island. Now, in this 19-month contract that the U3 Advisors will be tasked with, they're going to have to evaluate plan and sell the acreage. Now, what is interesting, the company is based in Philadelphia, Boston, and New York, and was hired through the Waters District request for qualification. Among 6 applicants, U3 Advisors was deemed the best candidate. I know you do a lot of work around Northside and also talking about the impacts Panther Island can have on it. What are some of your excitements or concerns about the releasing of this land today?
So I know that the city has put some effort into kind of revisiting the plan for Panther Island, because the original plan before the funding came through was done so long ago, and that's a good thing to do, to reconsider things when a lot of time has gone by and there might be other needs. But this developable land now has a proposed strategic vision that identifies kind of the developable land that's available, who owns it, that on both the north side of the island and the south side of the island, and then also has increased the amount of open space that's required and the amount of land that will be open and available for the public to traverse it, even if they're not someone who lives or works in a business that's on the island. So all of that has been increased in the new vision for the area. And I think some of that came from some of the conversations that were spurred out of Community Design Fort Worth and others that are doing work in Northside, because when they first looked at the island, it very much appeared to be kind of an expansion of downtown, more of a commercial area that people would be, and then whether or not there's going to be housing on the island that is affordable to people is a question that people are still bringing up. So I think those conversations are still ongoing. I think the fact that the property owners, the Water District being one of them, has kind of not just impulsively sold land off, means that they have some desire to go with a plan that has had input from a lot of stakeholders and reflects kind of the greater good and what will be beneficial to both themselves as people selling land, their vision for the island, the city's vision for the island, and the adjacent community owners and stakeholders. So I think it can be a good thing. I just think we need to keep an eye on it.
Just to note, the Panther Island project received $403 million in federal funding in 2022 to go towards the construction of the bypass. Those funds came after Panther Island experienced years-long delays in receiving government money, including a 2018 stall when it lost support from the Trump administration. So everyone trying to defund the federal government and make us not the United States of America anymore, and instead of the independent states of Americas who don't work with each other, realize how this idea was able to become fruition. Project still needs $98 million in federal dollars to be considered fully funded. We will see how that will continue to go and what impact, which we see with all the federal stuff going on, what kind of impact that could have on us actually making that happen. We're going to move into the next development. This is JPS development. JPS has dollars that they're trying to manage and move as the Commissioner's Court continues to try to challenge the funding of our county hospital, but then also being able to fund a bond that has been hard to collect and do work with because of inflation and higher costs of fulfilling the bond that was voted on.
There was also some delays due to COVID, and so they have seen an escalation in what the cost of all the things that they put into their plan would actually cost. So they had a master's facility plan that detailed all the new facilities that they were proposing, including medical homes, psychiatric emergency centers, medical outpatient buildings, parking garages, and new hotel towers. The plan is supported by an $800 million bond package, which was approved back in 2018. And so they are having to look at the entirety of it, and they estimate that the entire expansion project would cost $1.2 billion in the beginning, and then it rose to $1.5 billion, and now in most recent projections, it has jumped by 40% to a projected budget of $2.1 billion. So JPS is needing to find an additional $600 million to pay for that bill, and I think that they are looking at delivering some of the things early on, and I think they actually broke ground. I don't know if it was a ribbon cutting or a groundbreaking. It may have been a ribbon cutting on a facility that they have moved forward with, that they also, the medical home Southwest Tarrant, which is being named for outgoing, long-serving County Commissioner Charles Roy Brooks. It was a ribbon cutting ceremony.
I'd had a crazy cool little interaction with Roy Brooks like over the holidays. It was kind of smooth. I felt like I did my duty as a person. You know, he kind of has a cane now, and I was in line at Smokeaholics, and he was getting like his Thanksgiving turkey, and he got like, I guess he had his whole family, so he had like sets of stuff, and I mean, so him carrying it by himself to his car. So I was like, Commissioner Brooks, do you need a hand? And I carried his turkeys to the car for him. I felt like I did my service. I felt
That's
good.
very nice. I'm sure he appreciated it.
He gave me a hug. I was like,
He's a nice guy.
Thank you. He was really sweet.
I really appreciate him. So the next project that they're looking at is the Psychiatric Emergency Center, which is set to open in the summer of 2025. And I tell you that cannot happen soon enough. That is definitely a need. It will increase the hospital district's behavioral health capacity from 30 beds to roughly 90 beds, which I'm sure will be at capacity more quickly than we all imagine. But the master facilities plan will conclude with new hospital towers in the winter of 2029, more than a decade after the approval of the bond package. So I think it's just another example of these things taking a lot of time, and I hope that I know that Leah King is now heading up the JPS Foundation, and so that's a lot of pressure on her to help probably raise some of the funds to see these plans materialize and come to fruition.
Yeah, and so as we kind of wrap up the 3 short stories, you heard about the updates of Mercy Culture. You heard about the updates on transportation and some of the increase of success there. You've now also heard what's going on in the development side, what we have going on at the Alliance, as well as what's going on at Panther Island, and also one of our large hospital developments. And so now we're into the, I like to say, more of the subjectivity and, you know, exciting conversations where me and Ann are just going to go back and forth about who is in control of Fort Worth's connectedness and what are we concerned about as we get ready for 2025 and the future of Fort Worth. What does the next 25 years look like when you're talking about, a full developed island by then, and new hospital development and new spaces that are going to continue to maybe even outgrow the core of Fort Worth. You have Texas A&M still doing their things and having some of their stuff passed as well on this last council meeting. So a lot's happening. I don't know. I mean, just driving down 30, all these apartment complexes on each side, you know, driving down just to get to this podcast, that's going to be included with a lot of people. So I'm passing it to you here. What is your overall predictions, recommendations, and concerns as we think about who controls the connectedness of Fort Worth?
Well, we had a little conversation as we were going through the articles today, and even one of the articles that we didn't touch on in our transportation, which was a Fort Worth Star-Telegram article talking about DoorDash drones delivering services, launches from Fort Worth Hewlin Mall. And it kind of sparked this idea about community and what is community and how are these plans and development patterns affecting community. And it made both of us a little bit depressed because it made us feel like we are proponents of and supporters of and folks out in the community working hard to try to make Fort Worth a community where diverse groups come together, cross paths, interact with each other, are able to have conversations when we disagree, and live like in harmony. I know this is sounding very PC and huggy and all of that, but I feel like a lot of the things that we are touting and celebrating are making that kind of work more challenging. And I pointed out that during the pandemic, there were many kind of convenience things that we availed ourselves of. And that kind of percolated out of necessity because we had to be separated from each other, that haven't necessarily gone away. And it has made some people be like, well, that was really great. I like to have every single thing I need delivered to my door and never have to leave my house again. But all of that takes away from that interconnectedness and that community and, that diversity and that running into people that are not part of your bubble, if you can just have all those things delivered to your door. And so on the one hand, there's many elements of those things that could be harnessed for positive. So for example, I had somebody point out to me that if you can deliver healthy foods to a community that is in a food desert that doesn't have a grocery store, then that is a way to have those services available in those places without having to build a grocery store, which might not have the margins. And if you can connect people to medical appointments with autonomous vehicles that, are on demand, that's a good way for people to get around and get to those things so that they can be healthier. But I think that if we just allow that stuff to take us over and do those things for every need in our life, that just takes away from this community that I feel like we both are working towards and many others are working towards. And so sometimes that just leaves you bashing your head against a wall, feeling like it's all just going to happen and there's nothing we can do about it.
Like when you look at surveys, 50% or more are okay with sprawl. They're okay with that lifestyle. They like to drive. But here's where I'm more like, let's look at our leadership and let's see what our leadership is saying. So, on that article about the Trinity Metro ride sharing program, there was a quote from Mayor Parker saying, quote, "You cannot pour enough highway concrete to create the transportation needs for DFW." She said this at the Society of Commercial Realtors luncheon at Rivercrest Country Club on December 4th. Quote, "At the same time, I'm thankful that our city is not saddled with huge multi-billion-dollar bond projects to build out transit or saddled with legacy systems and subways like they have in New York or Boston that are incredibly aged and very expensive, because for us, we now can rethink transit into the future, and I do not think it is too far-fetched in the next few years to have flying taxis to take you to different places."
And I know you sent me this article just to make my head explode.
Well, like to add to it, let me get you the other person that I think is important in this one. Let me find my other flying taxi quote I got from another individual, and that is Ross Perot Jr. has even considered how current infrastructure could be adapted in a future with autonomous flying taxis and less road traffic. Toll lanes along I-35 could be used for autonomous trucks. Perot said if such technology becomes widely adopted, talking about flying taxis, the Metroplex sprawl could grow exponentially as distant towns gain quick access to cities. So these are two leaders who are writing the narratives that we're building out, which is currently what I'm reading, pro-flying taxis. Not pro building out train systems like Boston and New York, and pro sprawl. So it doesn't seem like they're trying to fix the sprawl. It's about going back to what you talk about, is how fast can we make things so that sprawl is less of a problem to get to the city.
And it's not going to work, because if you do it all on these roads, they literally fill up with the congestion. The more you allow that development to occur in those places, and the more lanes you add, the more that incentivizes all that sprawl, and the more people get on those roads in their cars. Now, having transit in those same corridors could address that. And as you and I both read Megan Kemble's book, City Limits, which I am now re-listening to as an audiobook from our public library's Libby app, which is fascinating. It's amazing to listen to her read the story in her own voice, but it's a little depressing because literally back in the 60s, we all knew and understood that adding lanes just leads to more congestion, and that the solution and the answer is actual mass transit, which is high occupancy vehicles that move more than small groups of people. And these smaller rideshare on-demand things are not going to be able to do that. And these flying taxis are definitely not going to be able to do that, because I mean, I'm not, again, I keep saying I'm not a transportation expert. And I wish that people would listen to the transportation experts, because I think they will tell you that those flying taxis are very expensive not to serve the masses. Joe Blow in his house out in this new Sendera Ranch development is not going to be able to fly to work in a flying taxi, even in Alliance, which is nearby. The cost of that, I think, is going to be cost prohibitive. And it reminds me of like Kobe Bryant and his daughter flying to a basketball practice.
Yeah.
And so the safety of it also concerns me.
And the amount of safety that airplanes had to go through before we allowed them to be what they are.
Not to mention that the space that all of those have. I mean, you can be lower down, but I've heard these little conversations between air traffic control and pilots about things that they see out there that are unidentified flying objects and whether they need to be concerned about them. And we're planning to put more flying objects up into that airspace. I mean, much lower than airplanes, obviously, but again, I don't want to discourage talking about the possibility of innovation and, exciting new technology that might lead us down a different path. But what I think it is being used for currently is to discourage expanding the tried and true mass transit options that do work. And we're not funding any of that. And people resist subsidizing or funding the transit side of things, but pour billions and billions of dollars into road expansion. And we're just going to devolve down into congestion on those lanes.
Yeah, I mean, as we guys know, Jimmy, the originator, co-host of the pod, he's still in our chats. And when I showed him the Maddie Parker quote about kind of multi-billion-dollar projects to build out transit, he says, yeah, we're only saddled with billion-dollar bond projects to build more highways. So it's like, a good thing we're not like Boston, New York, saddled with billion-dollar transit budgets. Yeah, we're doing that with. I mean,
clearly, if we're going to be honest, we need to admit that in those legacy transit systems, maintenance of those things did not get the prioritization that it needed. Similarly to the highways that we now find deteriorating underneath us. So clearly, our way of operating has been new shiny things, build new shiny things. Everybody wants to put their name on a new shiny thing, but maintenance of a thing is not exciting or fun or ribbon cutty. And so therefore we don't maintain things.
Yeah. And I definitely, I mean, to me, the Waymo world is coming. It is here really fast. I mean, I won't be shocked if we're making predictions of 2025. I'm willing to say in a 2025 prediction, Waymo will be in DFW. That's a prediction I'm willing to pit in. That's an easy one for me. I think that we will have Waymo cars like Austin by then, and I think that is, and that's, there's like positive and negatives to a Waymo, right? If we're all going to choose to drive, now it's not angry, irrational adults and humans on their phones driving.
Waymo follows the speed limit.
Yeah, exactly. So these autonomous driving vehicles, if it's not Waymo, it's Tesla, or if Uber figures out how to get involved with it as well. So like that's happening. The drone stuff with, DoorDash, that takes off riders, using a single occupancy vehicle to give you 4 a.m. Taco Bell. There's definitely a lot of positives that we have to be excited for. To me, I get really weird on the whole, I don't see the efficiencies that happens with flying taxis and putting humans in the air in the same sizes of cars, so 2 to 4 people. It sounds like it's another layer of like a privileged mobility where it's like, okay, you can either take public transportation, you can either take your own personal car, you can either take your own personal car on a tow road, you can either drive on a flying taxi. Like, it's the layer of access, so it's just a very expensive way for elite people to get around.
For elite people to not have to be in the midst of the congestion and the masses to get around what the rest of us have to.
So like that's the part that definitely concerns me there. But to me, I'm actually working on I'm in the third round of a TEDx talk that I'm potentially going to be able to share in Arizona. So it's the final round, but my talk is around, like, it's basically like, what is real, finding human connection in an artificial world. And I think what I'm betting on my thesis of the future, as if we look at, we're going from, physical infrastructure to, physical reality to digital reality, fiat dollar currency to cryptocurrency to human intelligence to artificial intelligence. These things are here. And what is being glorified is the Elon Musk being our shadow president to Donald Trump. There is going to be some type of more of this. So another one of my predictions is that Donald Trump and Elon Musk, everyone wants to be like them from the capitalist people side. So what you're actually going to see is our billionaires, a prediction I have, is that our billionaires are actually going to they're going to try to be Elon Musk's Fort Worth for them. And I think you're going to see that all across the U.S., where many Elons are wanting to do what Elon did at the federal level at the city level. And so that is going to happen. Now, do I think it's going to be the Basses? I don't think they're at the age space for that. But do I think you're going to hear more from Mike Berry? Do I think you hear more from the Hillwood people? I think there's going to be movement of these like younger billionaires wanting to do what Elon Musk did at the federal level, at the city level. I believe we'll see more of that in 2025.
Well, I think billionaires who pitch in on anything for the community expect a return on their investment. Yeah. And so I don't think people just give away their money. I think they strategically put their money in places that is going to benefit themselves. And when people say, oh, we should just let rich people take care of that, there's a cost to that. They are going to expect to have say in things that affect your life.
The part that is tough is that capitalism and government should play opposite of each other from accountability, from vetting. And so if you're able to change policies or always ask for amendments or revisions, which we already do in a lot of our city processes, so that we allow them to build wherever they want to build or figure out how to do things without enough.
And if we don't, they go to the state and try to preempt what we have here locally.
So, but I think it can get more openly spoken about in a way where it's not just about business, it's about how we should run life and the values of life that we should run. I think it becomes more of, wow, if Elon Musk can be the president of America, maybe I can become the mayor of cities, and do it more openly. I don't think you're right. I think Mayor Maddie Parker is talking about the viability of flying taxis because she's having lunch with the pros. I think that's happening, but it's no longer just back. I think what we're seeing with the Elon Trump, it's no longer has to be behind the scenes. It can be frontwards and facing, and we're going to dictate how this thing gets designed. So yeah, it's not a crazy prediction, but going back to kind of like the point of the TED Talk here for me, it's that what I'm believing what's happening is like physical connection and human connection, like fast food, like fast fashion, it's becoming more autonomous. So fast human connections, like talking to an Uber driver, like seeing the mailman, like ordering food at the front desk, all these things are going to continue to be machine driven. And so we're going to live more in a physical world that's contactless, and the access to just randomly walking into people is continuing to be very difficult. So like there's not going to be a lot of that anymore. And that's unfortunate.
I think it's definitely unfortunate because, when you do have those interactions, it feels really, really good. Like I keep running into people. I have a friend who went and graded papers in a coffee shop yesterday, and she talked about overhearing a conversation at the table next door. And I think that some of these things came out of necessity during the pandemic and were essential things to keeping us all healthy and safe. But I think we need to really think about how much we perpetuate them and continue them, because I don't think it's healthy and good for the human psyche to continue to be distant from and separated from and isolated to away from people that think differently or live differently, or even the people that we agree with. Because if we continue down the path that we're on, I think that's the direction we're headed in. In the beginning, when I was doing city planning, it was very much like if you design a house where your garage, you drive into your garage, you get out of it, you walk straight into your house, you're never in your front yard, you never interact with your neighbors. It was that level of isolation and separation. And all of that is just feeling like it's getting heightened by these modern conveniences and autonomizing and automizing and robot delivery and all of these things.
Yeah. And I'm just saying that, right, this, to me, like, I think how the DFW people are looking at it is like the writing's already on the wall and we have the opportunity to build city of something new. And they're looking at it from a positive angle. And what I do, like, how I'm trying to stay sane in all of this is I try to focus on what I believe is going to be true 20 years from now, 30 years from now. I believe human connection is going to be even greater 20 to 30 years from now because, one, the population is changing. People are being more isolated. So having an authentic, genuine, no agenda relationship with another human being will be more valuable than whatever the cost of Bitcoin is. Like, people lack authentic, genuine, one-on-one relationships with other adults. And I believe the human currency of that meaning is a legit asset that people will crave and want more of the older that we get, especially as the world becomes more convenient and we don't have to leave our homes. And I don't mind not leaving my homes. I like to only leave my home for strategic reasons of why I'm leaving. I'm leaving to do something. So like, then what's also, I believe, so my number one truth is human currency is going to be more valuable in the future. Number two is we're going to spend more and more time online. We already spend 4 hours, 8 hours on our phone. That is going to be 24/7. We're going to be digitized all the time. So going back to your Libby comment, like, we have to create community resources and digital infrastructures that's not about physical buildings, because it's less about physical infrastructure costs and more about digital environments that allow for us to communicate even when we're in our homes. So the designing of services and institutions in this world is going to have to change, because even government efficiencies and, we're currently, whatever the cost is to afford our debt, people aren't going to spend the dollars to create physical infrastructure the way that we used to, now that we're, this homestuck society. And so those are just kind of things that I believe are going to continue to happen. We need to be able to advocate and think about what does that look like for our society.
So I hope you're not saying that we should just wait for it to get so bad that we all realize everything that we're missing and then start trying to make sure that we have all those human connections again.
No, but I think, like, if you look at, like, so if I go, right, look at the consequences of where we're going, right? The number one way if you're under 40, the biggest way you're going to not exist is by driving on the road. So we've created highways and speed for sprawl, which now creates the biggest risk to you in your life is to be on a road. So that's a consequence. Number two consequence, we became a phone, isolated, digest information by engagement and algorithms that want us to spend more time on apps. So polarization is what we crave. And so now you have anxiety, mental health, extremism, at all-time highs. Number 3 is, I think, the fascinating part, that are the responsibilities of the lack of adults identifying as having a religious community, right? 26% of U.S. adults identify as unaffiliated with a religious group. So, to me, now you're also having that the physical communities that we did have out of work, we also don't believe in those either, because those have gotten exploited the same way our neighborhoods have gotten exploited in the sprawl. It's like there's so much control where you're stuck in your homes and you want to feel something. And so these mega churches prey on your need to have community. And then the only thing you get is these extremisms that are on your phone and in these big churches down the road from you. And so it's hard to create authenticity and, like you said, find a diverse pool of thought when you're not getting out enough and when you're not doing those things. So I don't know how we change those challenges that our system has designed for us.
I mean, I think that the system has somewhat designed it, but then also it is a matter of not designing what we desire. So not having a comprehensive plan for many, many years, allowing development and growth to just happen to us instead of regulating, which I know is, a bad word in Texas because we want people to just do what they want to do with their land, but this is what results from that. And I don't think that this means that we should stop fighting for the things that help continue to have that community be what it has been in the past and what I think can still be in the future. Because like you said, if we get too depressed about all this, the answer is, there's nothing we can do about it. The people with all the money want this, and the inertia of just going along and doing the things we've always done exactly the way we've done it is going to overcome any ability that those of us that are grassroots organizations trying to continue to build physical places where diverse communities can come together and providing mass transit and having events like Arts Goggle, where we talked about how you need to have those kind of things every day in Fort Worth instead of just twice a year. I think those kind of things are still important and still necessary and still challenge me to continue to work for those things and not just let the other take over.
There was a credible article in the Star Telegram about 35 years later about Alliance, and it talked about the history. It said that Alliance is twice the size as Manhattan. To give you perspective there, DFW Airport is the size of Manhattan. So think about the power of DFW and how much it's made Dallas-Fort Worth a competitive spot to live. You don't get this boom and growth without DFW Airport. With Alliance being that size, in our state, you could see in this 4 years that Alliance is going to really get some real big hitters moving in. That's really going to make us feel proud at Fort Worth. And I'm not saying me proud, but I think the problem is Fort Worth is on an agenda, and I think this agenda they think is good. And that is why it's hard for me, because I feel like you and I are outlaws and unique parties in a state that doesn't value the same things as we do.
I think what I read this somewhere, and I'm going to have to find the source, but it was basically talking about people who work for people and the planet. And that many of the driving forces now are not keeping in mind people and the planet.
Yeah, it's just profit. And another part I just want to also be so we started the 817 Gather, and to me a part of the reason of starting the 817 Gather is because this podcast is a legit digital community, right? This is a digital influential group in Fort Worth, and we have thousands of people who listen. And so we decided to do the 817 Gather with Nydia to create another version of community that people can participate in that is authentic, that gets us from the digital world to the physical world. Now, it's obviously hard to get to the physical world because you got to put in time, you got to find it. But like with the digital world, you can put the digital world in your ear and still participate in the physical world. That's kind of one of the hard parts about physical engagement. Is like you can't multitask in physical engagement. You can multitask in digital engagement, which is why I think people crave that as well. And so, but to me, I think the 817 Gather is an important next step, because I just think the power of the only people coming together on weekends should not just be churches. And so I think the 817 Gather is important because we're bringing people who want to come together and that we enjoy thinking critically and hearing new ideas and improving our intelligence and getting different perspectives. And so I'm proud of, us doing this for a second time and continuing to do that. But I think more of these things are going to have to happen, is people making intention on saying, hey, how do we reimagine that Sunday at 10 a.m. when back in the day we all went to church, and now the majority of people are not identified with a church organization, so they now have a space to go to still get access that we all miss because we're no longer religious, but we miss those things of community and togetherness and supporting one another. And so that's, to me, a big issue, is that the institutions of powers are not just companies. They're these large churches and these large colleges, right? University of Texas and Texas A&M are in the top 10 owners of private land in Texas, right? These, churches, the Mormon Church has a bigger endowment, twice the size of Harvard, twice the size of Princeton. And so these churches don't have to pay taxes. Clearly, they don't have to, if it's a church activity, they don't have to listen to city government. If the idea is these universal entities, we have to start thinking about how to modernize and create 21st century versions of these entities that are more open, modern, and ready for disruption, that includes both physical environments and digital environments. And I think the 817 pod / gather community is what I believe is an example of that. And something I'm inspired by looking at the Alliance Texas. It took 35 years to have the vision of Alliance Texas. And we need to have visions of what these things we're building in decades instead of days mantra as well.
That sounds much more hopeful than what I heard before. So I'm glad that we are ending or getting, concluding in a way that is definitely more positive. So and please, not just sit back and let this terrible thing happen to us.
Yeah. And so please, come to an 817 Gather. Number 2, share this pod with someone else. I think this can't grow unless you tell someone else about it. Please share it with another person. This is how we build capacity and leverage that is a more meaningful movement, rather than legacy establishments that are controlled by powers who want to keep us isolated and disconnected with one another. We're going to move into wins and losses. Every week we do wins and losses, and we do our losses first, and then we like to end with wins. My loss goes to, my loss is, I believe, that you have conservative entities in Fort Worth that is controlling our behaviors, our actions, and movements. And if you look at the conservative stack, it's the mercy culture Christian nationalists, it's the corporation innovation with no accountability. Right? We moved Governor Abbott's business lawyers to Fort Worth. It's the Republican conservative Texas Abbotts who want to stay in power. But then let's be clear, we are being nice to one university over the others, which is fine. They're doing a lot of work for us. I'm not saying what they're doing is not great. I'm not saying they're not a great university. But if you ask any conservative parent what school they want their kid to go to, it's Texas A&M. So it is not ironic that the one university that we're ultra in partnership with is also the most conservative large university in America. And so my loss is just this entirety of this conservative stack. And I mean, guys, the city has transferred $2.35 million in COVID-19 relief dollars to aid in the construction of the Texas A&M campus. I don't think that's how these dollars should be used. The dollars should be used on individuals, not institutions. And I think that's how do we create more institutions that are democratized for individual voice and inclusion. And so that is my loss.
My loss almost always ends up being something about development and transportation. So I think you did make a point earlier about all of the deaths on Texas roadways and roadways in general, and the need for speed and how that leads to people dying, and that's like the most highest way that people lose their lives. And I think that we just continue to double down on that development pattern, and a development pattern that perpetuates that. So that's definitely my loss. I think that TxDOT and our state legislators continue to pass laws that make it challenging and difficult to fund any other way of getting around besides roads and highways. So that's my loss.
My win is something you mentioned earlier, and that is the JPS unveiled its $39 million medical home Southwest Tarrant to Fort Worth leaders on December 18th ribbon cutting ceremony. The facility will be formally dedicated to outgoing Precinct 1 Commissioner Roy Charles Brooks, who has represented Southwest Tarrant County for 20 years. I'd be curious to have one question I would ask Commissioner Brooks. Does he believe Fort Worth is better off today than when he started? I think that'd be a fascinating thing to get his perspective on why, if the answer is yes, and why he says, I'm unsure or not sure. I think, though, someone like himself who's always fought for the marginalized voice is someone that, to get recognition by JPS, deserves his flowers.
Absolutely. So my win is that there are still people in our community that believe in the value of community and the value of supporting the types of things that we worry are going to be negatively impacted by kind of this push for modernization and improvement, and that those folks are the folks that I continue to find myself surrounded with because of the work that they do in Fort Worth, and that's what makes me have the energy and the desire and the drive to continue working in those spaces and making those improvements. And specifically, I will say the community stuff that's been happening in Northside recently. I don't know that there's necessarily been articles about it, and I probably should find some and send them to you if there have been. But the work that's being done in Northside specifically to bring people together, ranging from the North Main Street program, which identified immediately that while they were needing to focus on North Main in particular, that there's a whole community surrounding that area that is interested in being together as a community and participating in things, and that they can't just focus on one commercial corridor. And so they're doing really good things to educate and inform and include community in visioning for their own future.
There we have it, beautiful people. We will not be doing a podcast next week, as I believe we'll both be out of town. And so you guys, we went over an hour, so you have plenty to hear and discuss. And we'll be coming back next year, ready to rumble as we get ready for an election year. All the city council seats, the mayor, and so much more to get developed as we prepare for the future of Fort Worth. Thank you for being a committed listener, and we'll see you soon.
Happy New Year.